India's Operation Sindoor is actually being studied world over. An operation that was able, as the government puts it, to achieve its aim in a matter of 4 days. What were lessons from Operation Sindoor? Was India able to send across that message to Pakistan, a radical Islamist state sponsor of terror, that terrorism is unacceptable to India? Was India also able to send across that message that despite Pakistan being a nuclear weapons state, the nuclear blackmail will no longer work? Joining me on this India Today special broadcast is Colonel John Spencer. Colonel Spencer is the chair of Urban Warfare Studies at Modern War Institute. He's flown into India. He teaches at West Point. He's a combat veteran. He's an academic. He's a professor. And he's somebody who goes down to ground zero to study war. He's, of course, operated in Gaza. He's had several tours of duty in Israel and in Gaza. He's currently in India and joins us on this special broadcast. Colonel Spencer, welcome. Tell us more about what you're trying to study about Operation Sindoor in India.
Well, I'm trying to study just objectively what happened and why, and then what were the lessons that both India and hopefully Pakistan and the broader world, I think it will be studied in war colleges around the world, especially when you watch an entire nation change its doctrine. So this doctrine towards terrorism, establishing a new line, that immediate, overwhelming response to any terrorist attack. And like you said, underneath that, no longer with nuclear blackmail, although anybody who's trying to rattle a nuclear saber is reckless. India showed strategic leadership and how that can be achieved by keeping the goals limited and communicating every operation every day of the overall duration of Sindoor was very important.
So let's take this step by step. You're saying that India changed its doctrine. You were here in the immediate aftermath of 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, and that was in 2008. What was our doctrine then? How has India changed its doctrine, and when, in your appreciation, did that doctrine change?
Sure, yeah, I definitely walked the ground of every bit of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, and the response was really more diplomatic, hoping that the international community, the UN Security Council, the Americans, part of that operation. And although we've seen Rana returned, extradited, and that's a great thing, but if you look at that event after 26/11, look at 2016, I know you've covered widely 2019 or Balakot. This was a noticeable change in the national approach, that the military response would be immediate, but also very prescriptive on what was being hit. Like you said, the first step was an immediate response to the awful attacks of April 22nd, to hitting those 9 terrorist sites.
And India's response initially was restricted to 9 terrorist strikes, including Muridke and Bahawalpur. I mean, I've covered counter-terror operations for decades. I was very surprised Bahawalpur and Muridke were hit. But you've spoken of strategic messaging. Explain to us what you've been studying about India's strategic messaging, and in your appreciation, did it work?
Right, in an age of information operations, narrative warfare, information warfare, how important it was for India, one, to send an immediate message. And like you said, we've covered these wars before, even going outside of the line of control, hitting those other terrorist sites was a message. But communicating the reasons for the operation daily from both the political and the military leadership on the same sheet of music, really in a day of information operations, that's the level of communication that has to happen, which actually does keep things contained and directed towards the objective. This wasn't about India responding to Pakistan, wasn't about the Pakistani people. This was about terrorism and hitting terrorists.
So India wanted to hit terrorists, and India hit 9 terrorist training camps, launch pads, headquarters, and communicated to Pakistan that we do not want to escalate, we did not target military. And yet Pakistan retaliated, and Pakistan targeted Indian armed forces. So, one, did India's message not get across, or did Pakistan not comprehend? How do you see Pakistan's response and India's response to Pakistan's escalation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the transparency, too, was very important. That not only did India send that message, it sent it globally and was very transparent. And the briefings on it, these are the sites that were hit. Here's the satellite imagery to prove that they were hitting. As we've talked before, in God I trust, all others bring data. That was a really big part of this operation. But yes, when Pakistan responded, I think there was a message immediately there as well, as in Pakistan deciding to respond not in kind, but really escalating up the ladder. India's dominance of defense, the integrated air defense that was able to stop all of those drones and missiles, was a message in of itself, as in they were prepared and then they responded against those 11 military sites, which was a very clear message. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Indeed, because I would like to, whether it's targeting Pakistan's command and control center at Noor Khan, right next to the capital Islamabad, or their military headquarters in Rawalpindi, or targeting Rahim Yar Khan or Jacobabad or Sargodha, 200 kilometers deep inside Pakistan. Their best protected assets are there, from the American F-16s to the Chinese JF-17s and J-10C Thunders. I want to come to you on the aspect of 11 military targets from Skardu in Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir to Bulari in Sindh and Malir cantonment in Karachi. But more important, sir, what is your appreciation? And that is something that I'm sure America is very interested in. The Chinese tactics, the Chinese weapons, and the Chinese systems. What have you been able to assess from Operation Sindoor?
I'm still learning and still here on the ground studying, but clearly the Chinese weapons, Pakistan is basically a proxy with all of that Chinese equipment, didn't perform as it was probably sold to perform. Pakistan wasn't able to stop any of India's strikes, which were every one of them, a very strategic decision on hitting a radar, hitting an air defense system, an airfield, at what time they were hit, but the Pakistani Chinese systems weren't able to defend. So again, India sent a message with each one of the different locations, as you said, farther than they've done before, hitting sites showing restraint, as in I can hit you anywhere I want to. These Chinese systems have failed in achieving their mission, and really without the integration, which was really what the master class that India taught during the Operation Sindoor was, it's not just about what you have, what gear you have, although the made in India indigenous Indian systems did show superior to Pakistan's Chinese systems, but also in integrating. That's the higher level of military operations that was demonstrated here, because even if those Chinese systems would have performed like they were told to be, they weren't synchronized and integrated in a suite of capabilities that India demonstrated both in defense and offense.
Oh, that's very interesting you mentioned that. So are you telling us, sir, and are we to understand that while the Pakistanis had their F-16s, American-made Lockheed Martin equipment, while they had their Saab Eye in the Sky, they also had the Chinese honky HQ-9s and HQ-16s. They were not integrated. Their weapons and systems were not talking to each other. Is that why Pakistan was vulnerable despite having the PL-15 missiles, air-to-air missiles? Because we were told some of the air-to-air missiles performed better than what international understanding was. International understanding was perhaps 150 kilometers. They were able to target more than 200 kilometers deep inside.
Absolutely. One, I often listen to you and learn myself, and that level of depth of understanding. You're absolutely right. There's no war there's perfection on one side or the other. The idea that there's a bloodless war, that you haven't miscalculated. Clearly, India will have lessons here, like that PL-15 and it's what was expected to be its ranges. Absolutely, that weakness in the architecture of the Pakistani systems, which are from multiple countries, like you said, but it's not integrated. Some of them don't even talk to each other, while other systems like the aerial, like the AWACS version of systems seem to have been working, because this was a great demonstration of beyond visual range, not crossing anybody's borders, but still having the effects on both sides.
You've been a part of CQBs or close quarter combats, and you've studied it and you teach that. I want to understand, in urban warfare or in future warfare, are we looking at more CQB kind of operations, or are we looking at more standoff weapons and not putting in your ground forces, but using in longer range missiles, rockets, air power? And if I may, and it is controversial, is that primacy of air power that we're talking about in future combat?
So absolutely not. I mean, if one lesson I learned going around the world is that some nations make that critical error of believing that it's only that futuristic technology, that drone or that unmanned system that is the way of the future, and I cannot have an army, I cannot have these naval capabilities. That's not the case. Warfare has a combination of low-tech, hard, young men and women doing hard things is a vital component of warfare, and it's when you make that mistake of thinking that there won't be a land campaign when you lose those capabilities, that the enemy exploits those vulnerabilities. And in this case, just like when India did the briefings, it wasn't just the DGAO that showed superior. It was because of those land-based systems doing their job, even the naval systems doing their job. Absolutely, you have to have all of those joint, from space, cyber, infantrymen, artillery, all of it working together. So no, that's not the lesson of the future, that these high-tech systems will replace manpower that you still need.
What an interesting takeaway, and it's so enlightening. So what you're saying is, while we will require the longer range weapons, beyond visual range missiles, you will still require that soldier on ground with his surface to air missile, with his anti-tank guided missile, with his Zu-23 ACAC gun, his anti-aircraft gun, with that L-70. The entire gamut of air defense would be employed in future warfare. So you'll have that anti-aircraft gun and you will have that laser beam. Is that what you're saying, sir?
100%. And that's really the enduring lesson of modern combat, is that you need all of those systems. So be careful on what you say, or you hear people say, we don't need that anymore, whatever that is.
So we have decision makers who watch India First, and they watch this show. So I'm sure they've already factored that in, and they should. So you need boots on ground. You need that soldier. You need that infantry combat vehicle for quick mobility, and you require the guns. But is it also your understanding that made in India weapons, or you have to be self-reliant in weapons manufacturing and upgradation to be ahead in combat?
Absolutely. Clearly, that was a big lesson of Operation Sindoor, that those investments in making India, from the BrahMos to the Akash to the other systems, was a good decision and a good investment, and it does lead to some strategic independence. But I will say that your allies is your greatest strength. So like India's developments in AI and laser technologies will benefit other militaries. So I'm really interested in seeing where that goes. So complete strategic independence may be a bridge too far, but absolutely that a capability to have that strength within your own system clearly paid off in Operation Sindoor.
Colonel John Spencer, it was wonderful talking to you and understanding what you've been able to gather about Operation Sindoor. And once your tour of learning, if I may, or tour of duty here is over, would love to read your reports and your assessment and what you would be teaching at West Point and at other academic institutes about Operation Sindoor. A much longer conversation with Colonel John Spencer will come up on the Chakravyuh podcast with me on India Today. But that is all I have for you on India First this evening. Many thanks for watching.